This is from the website thewaythetruthandthelife.net.
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
This newscast was 2 days ago and includes a false representation of something that was falsely reported on back in 1998 and is filled with many misconceptions and misunderstandings about sexuality. In 1980, I was chairman of adult education at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Buffalo. I organized a Needs of Children seminar that brought Catholic nuns and everything else for 8 weeks. We'd get together on Sunday. But in that seminar, there was much insight into the development of children. The title was The Needs of Children, including college professors and a psychiatrist. And I used this as a foundation to build on. It gave an insights to build on to understand sexuality and the misrepresentation. And building on that, I will share these insights. But first of all, the corruption of the truth of this report, where they're essentially making a saint out of this young man who had a tragic life.
And in Washington, D.C., Episcopal church leaders have interred the ashes of gay college student Matthew Shepard in the National Cathedral. In 1998, Shepard, who was just 21 years old, was lured from a Laramie, Wyoming bar, robbed for $20 cash, lashed to a fence, bludgeoned in the head with a pistol, and left to die on the prairie. His killing shocked the conscience of the nation and spurred the LGBTQ rights movement. In 2009, Congress passed the Matthew Shepard Act, which expanded hate crimes laws to cover those targeted over their sexual orientation. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
This is a picture of the tragic young man, which unfortunately turns out he was drug addicted, HIV positive, and a homosexual prostitute who got involved with other people and money and stealing, and they were stealing from him, and they beat him, but they were not anti-homosexual. One of them had been a sexual partner of yours. So this is just exposing the fraud. I'm in my Russian home, and this story that was published 2 days ago brought up a terrible travesty that warps the truth and just tears at people's hearts, and has been the foundation for completely changing the laws of what marriage is, and the transgender boys going in girls' bathroom and girls going in boys' bathroom because they think they're transgender, and all these things that the understanding of what's really taking place and what is degraded the cultural home culture foundation is so important, because it's not bad people, it's the lack of the early childhood, and even during the pregnancy, the fetus, what it is experiencing, both physically and sensory-wise, emotional. There's a mammalian thing that requires a mammalian bond. If you take a kitty away from its mother too soon, when it's an adult, it doesn't know how to be a mother. My uncle was a mink rancher in Pennsylvania, And that was one of the basic things why he was successful. The simple rule, one of God's simple laws, what makes the babies makes the future. And the way that he raised a healthy herd of mink was to choose the mothers well. And what did that mean? Take the female babies from a litter that had a good mother and keep them for mothers, because they have something, that mammalian mammalian maternal bonding ability. So many humans are deprived of that. So many women want to be good mothers and can't. I'll show you a little clip from NYU back in the 50s, 1950s. I would like to add a background note here for understanding. I have some intuitive personal experiences having to do with homosexuality, and would like to share that. When I moved into the assistant minister's quarters at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Buffalo, that church hosted and welcomed homosexual and all kinds of behavior. I even knew of some who thought it was fine to have sexual activity with children, but that was a very liberal. The people's views were not imposed on one another. But I had many friends that I worked with on the adult education committee, and I was chairman. I was a representative for a 17 church charity there, the Concerned Ecumenical Ministries for the Upper West Side. That was organized by the Industrial Areas Foundation, Obama's friend there in Chicago. But they sent out community organizers 2 by 2 to organize the community to find out what different neighborhoods were angry about and help get them together to confront the problem, like government corruption, the building inspectors, and the people that would buy up poor apartments and not take care of them until they were degraded, and they would bribe the inspectors to get away with it, and then after it was degraded enough, they'd tear everything down and build a building and increase their profits tremendously. That type of thing. Low rent people that manipulate. But at any rate, I knew how to reach out to people. I had sold magazines door to door across the country a couple of times when I was 16, before I went in the Air Force, and I learned how to interact with people and go around the neighborhood and knock on doors. We were in a different city every week, so I helped organize a latchkey program, an after-school program for children that had failed the year before and they were going to lose the funding for it, and I got it organized. So then they even invited me or elected me as chairman of that 17 church charity. But there were homosexuals from different churches too. And in that community there in Elmwood Avenue in Buffalo, there were a number of homosexual bars, one that kind of catered to lesbians and another to gay men. But and I worked on committees with these people, and many had good integrity and not aggressive. They kept their own life, and I kept mine. And, but there's another strong point here. After finishing a degree in mathematical physics at the University of Buffalo, I decided to have the free time to be with my children and do research, that rather than go back to carborundum research, I decided to become a physics teacher. And I got a nice job at Sweet Home, a suburban Buffalo school. And it was wonderful. I had classes of like 14 and 16 in pairs. They were using the Harvard Project physics, where they learn by investigation rather than by lecture and reading. And they learned the math skills in order to deal with their actual observations. They learned graphs and the algebra of it, and it was such a joy to teach them. That was developed in response to the Man on the Moon program. They learned that the educational system had failed them. Mathematicians weren't able to do anything with the hands-on stuff, and the engineers in those days were just hands-on. They did their math with a slide rule, and they found that they needed to have a better curriculum where the skills of the abstract mathematics and the concrete physical intuition were together. They wouldn't have to send two people to do one job and have all the problems with them communicating. So they developed this program of learning by investigation, by reality, not by a book. It was such a joy, but then my wife divorced me. It took my 3 children, my lovely home, and my income, and I needed to finish a master's degree in science education in order to be permanently certified in New York State. This has to do with learning something about homosexuals, because I was working at night in a restaurant, your host there, and a number of people would come in. I just work in a booth. The waiters and waitresses and cooks were glad to have me there. They were open all night because of motel next door, and truck drivers were kept overnight there, and they were their place where they'd come to eat. At any rate, here the AA meetings in the area, the people would come for coffee afterwards, and I made a bunch of friends. That's a whole nother thing for another program. The Alcoholics Anonymous is founded on the home church of the New Testament, but that's a whole nother thing. The fellowship of getting together and sharing with one another and building relationship to overcome the problems of living. At any rate, to get back to this, at this time I met someone that brought me deeply into the AA and to the International Convention for Human Rights and Against Psychiatric Abuse. In those days, homosexuality was a mental illness that you could get locked up for. And women with the postpartum depression were often locked up, and there was electroshocking. Well, this woman had been married to a man who was on the road salesman and ended up an alcoholic, and she got involved with AA to try and help him out, and then they got divorced, but she still had a whole fellowship of friends there. Mabel White was her name, but the background insight that she gave was wonderful too, because she had worked. Let me give you a quick background of her. She was a nurse in the Army in the Second World War. And when she came home to Buffalo, they didn't have telephones then, or most people didn't. They had them on a wall. You could, outside the apartment, you could ring a bell and they'd get a hold of an operator and they'd put a call through you, but that's another thing. She come home, no telephone, unlocked the door in the apartment and went in and found her husband in bed with her sister, and she went bonkers. And they ended up calling the police on her, and she was angry with the police. So the police took her to the Buffalo Psychiatric Center and locked her up. She was angry with them there, so they tied her to the bed, and then they gave her shock treatment. Finally, she got free from that, but she was very active in this International Convention for Human Rights and Against Psychiatric Abuse. That they had had 10 international conventions, and she had interacted with a number of people. It turns out that homosexuals were a big part of that movement because they had been labeled as mentally ill and locked up many times. But she had many homosexual friends and had insights which later on, when I went to live next to the Unitarian Church, I found much of it to be true. First of all, amongst the gay men, there's a lot of promiscuity. That's why HIV spread so much. Many partners and spreading disease amongst especially male homosexuals. But amongst female homosexuals, a common thing is there's quite a difference between the ones in the female role and the ones in the dominant male role. But at any rate, it's just interesting how personality enters into and behavior enters into these things. You can look up those statistics for yourself. But my work at the Unitarian Church also, Charlie was upstairs. He was the caretaker. And oftentimes he wasn't there. I would take, if they needed to open up, the church was next door, and the downstairs lobby was a large meeting hall, where we would have our fellowship after the congregational meeting, which was through into another building. But it would be open for different groups to have their celebrations or whatever. And both the lesbian and gay community often used it for their celebrations. And I would take care of it for Charlie when he wasn't there. And one thing I can tell you very much, to clean up after the gay men was a pleasant task. They were very clean and neat, and very polite if you'd go in among them. But with the lesbians, it was much more complicated. They left a mess. Many times we ended up having to get a plumber because they would put their menstrual things and flush them in the toilet and end up with a clogged drain rather than using the wastebasket provided for that. But this difference in behavior is real. Why, I don't know. But as I say, I've had worked with many homosexuals, and that's their business. I'm not homosexual. I went through the stages where I enjoyed boys, being with boys, and much more than girls. That is a normal thing, and I will talk about that after the article showing how this young man's life was used to falsely represent and gain sympathy and destroy the cultural values that help build healthy homes. I will get into that more, but here, let's go to that article which shows the real background of this unfortunate young man.
The truth behind America's most famous gay hate murder. Matthew Shepard's horrific death at the hands of redneck homophobes shocked America and changed its laws. Now a different truth is emerging, but does it matter? Julie Bindel reports. Julie Bindel. At Bindel J. Sunday, October 26, 2014, 09:30 GMT. A basket of flowers hangs from the fence where Matthew Shepard was left tied and beaten. Photograph, Steve Liss / The Life Images Collection / Getty. The horrific killing of Matthew Shepard in 1998 is widely seen as one of the worst anti-gay hate crimes in American history. Matthew was beaten by two assailants, Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson. They pistol-whipped him with a gun and tied him to a fence in freezing conditions and set fire to him before leaving him to die. The attack became a cause célèbre. It precipitated a national backlash against hyper-macho culture and tacit tolerance of homophobia. As a result of Matthew's death, many good things have happened for the gay community. The Play the Laramie Project has toured the U.S. and many other countries, telling Matthew's story and encouraging campaigns against bigotry. Politicians and celebrities pledged support and funding to combat anti-gay hate crime. The Shepard family have become campaigners for gay rights. Judy and Dennis Shepard run the Matthew Shepard Foundation, which funds educational programs and an online community for teens to discuss sexual orientation and gender issues. There have been numerous documentaries, dramas, books, and events based on the story. The men responsible for his death were convicted of first-degree murder and given 2 life sentences. They were not charged with a hate crime, as that wasn't possible under Wyoming's criminal law. But after lengthy wrangling in Congress, President Obama finally signed the Matthew Shepard Act in 2009, a law which defines certain attacks motivated by victim identity as hate crimes. But the Matthew Shepard story is not yet finished. A new twist came last year with the publication of another book, this one by investigative journalist Stephen Jimenez, who has spent 13 years interviewing more than 100 people with a connection to the case. His conclusion, outlined in the Book of Mad, Hidden Truths About the Murder of Matthew Shepard, is that the grotesque murder was not a hate crime, but could instead be blamed on crystal meth, a drug that was flooding Denver and the surrounding area at the time of Matthew's death. This new theory has, understandably, caused a lot of anger. Jimenez has faced a barrage of criticism since the publication of his book and has had readings to promote the book boycotted. Jimenez claims, however, that many of his critics have not actually read it. The Advocate, America's leading LGBT magazine, published a piece last year entitled, "Why I'm Not Reading the Trutherism About Matt Shepard." Jimenez has been accused of being a revisionist, a criticism usually reserved for extreme right-wing ideologues that deny the Holocaust, and labeled a homophobe. People object to the idea of the book, rather than what is in the book, says Jimenez. The anger directed at me has been pretty extreme. Grade A student, Matthew Shepard was just 5 feet 2 in and his slight frame gave him an air of vulnerability. Photograph, AP. Jimenez had no intention of causing such controversy. He's an award-winning writer and TV producer, and visited Laramie shortly after the murder to gather material for a screenplay about the case. When he started, he was convinced that Matthew died at the hands of homophobes, but he soon discovered that Matthew's tragedy began long before the night he was killed. Jimenez found that Matthew was addicted to and dealing crystal meth and had dabbled in heroin. He also took significant sexual risks and was being pimped alongside Aaron McKinney, one of his killers, with whom he'd had occasional sexual encounters. He was HIV positive at the time of his death. This does not make the perfect poster boy for the gay rights movement, says Jimenez. Which is a big part of the reason my book has been so trashed. Matthew's drug abuse, and the fact that he knew one of his killers prior to the attack, was never explored in court. Neither was the rumor that the killers knew that he had access to a shipment of crystal meth with a street value of $10,000 which they wanted to steal. Matthew was born into an affluent family and had attended state school in Casper, Wyoming. The 21-year-old political science major at Laramie University stood only 5 feet 2 in, and his blonde hair, braces, and slight frame gave him an air of vulnerability and innocence. In his junior year of high school, Matthew moved with his family to Saudi Arabia. There were no American high schools in Saudi at the time, so he was sent to the American school in Switzerland. By the time he enrolled at Laramie, he spoke 3 languages and had aspirations to be a human rights advocate. Somewhere along the line, however, Matthew fell from being a grade A student to a drug-addicted prostitute who diced with danger. He suffered periods of depression, possibly as a result of being gang-raped a few years earlier while on holiday in Morocco. But this is not the Matthew Shepard who became a celebrated figure for the gay rights movement in America. Laramie is considered the most liberal town in Wyoming. It sits in a flat, treeless sweep of high plains. With the ranching industry in decline, employment here is dominated by the University of Wyoming. It has a quaint western charm, tree-lined streets, beautiful parks, and a renovated historic downtown at the edge of the railway yard with small shops and restaurants. It is surrounded by rolling prairie, ranches, the snowy mountain range and vast, wide-open spaces. But the town also has a number of mobile home parks at the edges, some more run-down than others. On the evening of October 6, 1998, Matthew went to the Fireside Bar, a local hangout that was purportedly gay-friendly. It was karaoke night, and locals rubbed shoulders with workers calling in for a swift drink on their way home. Shortly afterwards, Russell Henderson and Aaron McKinney arrived. The three men chatted briefly before leaving the bar and getting in a truck belonging to McKinney's father. In the truck, Matthew was robbed of his keys, wallet, and shoes and beaten repeatedly by one or both of the men. He was then taken from the truck, pistol whipped up to 18 times on the head, and kicked between the legs. Matthew was tied to a fence, set on fire, and left unconscious. 15 hours after the attack, student Aaron Kreefels was out riding his bike when he discovered Matthew tied to the fence, barely alive. He initially mistook him for a scarecrow. Matthew's face was covered in blood, aside from tear tracks on each side of his cheeks. Judgment Day, Russell Henderson, 21, and Aaron McKinney, 22. Photograph, at Andrieski/AP. The first officer at the scene was Reggie Flutie. The only thing I could see was partially somebody's feet and I got out of my vehicle and raced over, said Flutie, her short blonde hair, fringe, and wire-rimmed glasses making her appear more social worker than police officer. I seen what appeared to be to a young man, 13, 14 years old, because he was so tiny, laying on his back, and he was tied to the bottom end of a pole. I did the best I could. After leaving Matthew tied to the fence, McKinney and Henderson headed for Matthew's home, but on the way encountered two young Hispanic men, Emiliano Morales and Jeremy Herrera, slashing tires for fun. The men got into a fight, resulting in McKinney cracking open Morales's head with the same gun he had used on Matthew. Police officer Flint Waters arrived, grabbed Henderson. He and McKinney had run in different directions, and found the truck, the gun, Matthew's shoes, and credit card. I spoke to Waters, who has since retired from the police, having seen him praise the Book of Matt on social media. I believe to this day that McKinney and Henderson were trying to find Matthew's house so they could steal his drugs. It was fairly well known in the Laramie community that McKinney wouldn't be one that was striking out of a sense of homophobia. Some of the officers I worked with had caught him in a sexual act with another man, so it didn't fit. None of that made any sense. But when Matthew's friends Walt Bolden and Alex Trout heard of the attack, they rushed to the hospital. They contacted the Associated Press and a number of local gay organizations that same day. Bolden, a 46-year-old college instructor who says he was the last person to talk to Matthew before he met McKinney and Henderson, linked the attack to Wyoming legislature's failure to pass a hate crimes bill. Bolden later said the assault was identified as a hate crime by a policeman. Stephen Jimenez is an award-winning journalist and gay man. So why has he put such time and effort into attempting to prove that Matthew's murder was not a hate crime, especially as it has seen him accused of being an ally to the right-wing Christian fundamentalists who deny the reality of homophobia? The view was that homophobic rednecks walked into a bar and saw an obviously gay man with money and targeted him and beat him to death for that reason, says Jimenez. But that isn't what happened. Nothing in this book takes away from the iniquity and brutality of the crime or the culpability of his murderers, but we owe Matthew and other young men like him the truth. Aaron and Matthew had a friendship. They'd been involved sexually, they bought and sold drugs from each other. That complicates the original story of two strangers walking into a bar and targeting Matthew, someone they did not know, because he was gay. Although McKinney has never acknowledged that he knew Matthew, Jimenez found a dozen sources that had seen them together. One is Kathleen Johnson, the former owner of Laramie antique store Granny's Attic, who knew Henderson, McKinney, and Matthew. The young, unemployed men had not had easy lives. Henderson's mother was a chronic alcoholic who had been repeatedly beaten by his father. McKinney had spent much of his childhood alone, left by his mother with his grandparents, who locked him in the basement to keep him out of trouble. Russell Henderson used to hang around with gay people, Johnson told me. Laramie had a big gay population. I knew what people's sexual orientation was because my best friend's son was gay. I saw them hanging around with Russell. The police did not investigate the killer's relationship to the gay community. 5 days after the attack, on October 12, Matthew died. On October 14 the celebrity vigil was held on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, attended by the likes of Ted Kennedy and Ellen DeGeneres. Elton John sent flowers to Matt's funeral. Barbara Streisand telephoned the Albany County Sheriff's Office to demand quick action on the case, and Madonna called an assistant to University President Philip Dubois to complain about what had happened. The day Matthew died, President Clinton told journalists at the White House, "In our shock and grief one thing must remain clear, hate and prejudice are not American values." Dark side, anti-gay protesters at Matthew's funeral. Photograph, Doug Collier/AFP/Getty Images. The funeral was attended by more than 1,000 mourners, and picketed by the Westboro Baptist Church, led by Fred Phelps, a defrocked minister and founder of GoDatsFags.com. To counter the protest, Matthew's friends dressed as angels. Joanne Wipajewski, an author and former senior editor at The Nation, was one of the many journalists who came to Laramie after the news of Matthew's attack. She was there for Harper's Magazine and was the only journalist to suggest early on that methamphetamine may have played a role in Matthew's death. The case was used to highlight the fact of violence against gay people, Wipajewski told me. Hate crime legislation under Clinton included provisions for race and enhanced penalties for crimes against women. These were used as sweeteners to those on the left. They were like the identity politics of criminal law. This is what gave some other groups the idea that hate crime legislation was a good thing. Wipajewski thinks the reason some sections of the gay community are so angry about the Jimenez book is obvious. Jimenez has taken away their angel, and there is the reflexive sense that as a community its suffering was being at last recognized. The people shaping the news require a very simple story: they have to be angels and villains. John Stoltenberg is a gay rights activist who lived with the feminist writer Andrea Dworkin until her death in 2005. He's a longtime supporter of the Laramie Project, but has also blogged positively about the Book of Matt. Keeping Matthew as the poster boy of gay hate crime and ignoring the full tragedy of his story has been the agenda of many gay movement leaders, he says. Ignoring the tragedies of Matthew's life prior to his murder will do nothing to help other young men in our community who are sold for sex, ravaged by drugs, and generally exploited. They will remain invisible and lost. Ted Henson is a former lover and long-term friend of Matthew's. The pair originally met when Matt was growing up in Saudi Arabia. Henson told me he believes that the Book of Matt is nothing more than the truth and that he was never certain that the murder was an anti-gay hate crime. I don't know why there is so much hostility towards Steve, he told me. Matt would not have wanted to be seen as a martyr, but would have wanted the truth to come out. Other Laramie residents believe there is another form of prejudice at work in the way Matthew's story has been told. One that concerns the oft-repeated notion that Wyoming is full of gay-hating bigots. Ray Hageman reported on the case for Wyoming Radio in 1998 and was always skeptical of the media construction of the story. National media couldn't resist a narrative that fits with its preconceived notions about people in rural western states, Hageman told me. You know, us simple folks with the piece of straw hanging from our mouths, spitting tobacco, and shooting pop cans from the front porch. The folks in Laramie just had to take it, because a fellow who happened to be gay was murdered in their town. The Matthew Shepard Foundation stands firm about the murder being fueled by homophobic hatred. I asked for a reaction regarding the book, but was sent a pre-prepared statement by Executive Director Jason Marsden, who was a friend of Matthew's. We do not respond to innuendo, rumor, or conspiracy theories. reads the statement first issued when the Book of Matt was published. Instead, we remain committed to honoring Matthew's memory and refuse to be intimidated by those who seek to tarnish it. We owe that to the tens of thousands of donors, activists, volunteers, and allies to the cause of equality who have made our work possible. Coming to Light, a vigil held in New York for Matthew Shepard on October 19, 1998, 2 weeks after he was murdered. Photograph, Evan Agostini/Getty Images. On September 16, the Casper Star-Tribune, the local paper in Matthew's hometown, published an editorial claiming that an award Jimenez had recently received for his book deserves rejection, saying, "From the beginning there have been those who want to ignore the sadistic homophobic motives of Shepard's attackers and instead insist the matter was a drug deal gone bad." The debate will no doubt rage on. Matthew Shepard's murder will always be, for some, a symbol of the hatred many lesbians and gay men face in the US and beyond. The town of Laramie can take some comfort from reacting with such dignity and humanity in the aftermath and lending its name to the Laramie Project, which has changed hearts and minds. But the mystery remains, not so much why Matthew died, but why the gay community, after almost 5 decades of campaigning for equal rights, relies so fundamentally on the image of the perfect martyr to represent the cause. Since you're here, we have a small favor to ask. More people are reading The Guardian than ever, but advertising revenues across the media are falling fast. And unlike many news organizations, we haven't put up a paywall. We want to keep our journalism as open as we can. So you can see why we need to ask for your help. The Guardian is editorially independent, meaning we set our own agenda. Our journalism is free from commercial bias and not influenced by billionaire owners, politicians, or shareholders. No one edits our editor. No one steers our opinion. This is important because it enables us to give a voice to the voiceless, challenge the powerful and hold them to account. It's what makes us different to so many others in the media, at a time when factual, honest reporting is critical. If everyone who reads our reporting, who likes it, helps to support it, our future would be much more secure. For as little as $1, you can support The Guardian, and it only takes a minute. Thank you. Support The Guardian. Topics: LGBT rights.
This is a page from my work in progress on my website. On the left-hand side, the picture shows the stages of brain development. On the right-hand side, it shows the decrease in male and female brains. The center shows the stages of human caring development. This largely is built on work from the seminar on the needs of children, and especially the testimony of the psychiatrist Bruno Schattdecker. He was at the Unitarian Universalist Church, where I was the adult education chairman, among other things, but I organized an 8 weeks, once a week, Sunday afternoon seminar on the needs of children, and had various experts. But when in the background, it's actually strange I would even have anything to do with Bruno, because when he was at the Buffalo Psychiatric Center, he's the only psychiatrist that ever ordered a lobotomy on a veteran. But then he also was in charge of psychiatry at the Buffalo Psychiatric Center, which had many problems that I had heard about from Mabel White. At any rate, he had a rich background, and the insight he gave from his background at NYU. Now, this is an old man that's long dead. He was old at the time that I actually ended up being close friends with him and going to his home to visit and so forth. It's strange, but at any rate, he talked and gave me the foundation, just the first 4 steps, what you see in this sign here, are the caring stages. Narcissistic. This is what he was learned in his pre-med back at the beginning of the 1900s. The first stage of child development is narcissism. Every little baby just go, and you run around and take care of them. They're like little lords and ladies. When they were in their mother, they had everything provided for them, and they think the same thing should go on when they're in the outside world. And if you have a healthy foundation yourself, you take a wonderful care of them and give them food, and all they do is give you a diaper change, and you still love them and care for them. But the next stage of after narcissism, and it says in the Bible, love thy neighbor as thyself, implies you better love yourself too. But we need a healthy foundation as an early first 6 months are so important in this. But so narcissism, then the next stage is homoerotic. Babies like babies, boys like boys, and girls like girls. That's a normal stage. And then when the hormones hit, if you have a strong foundation, you give up that, and you're interested in the opposite sex, and the heteroerotic, and interested in the women with boobs if you're a man, and women interested in that physical body, attracted to the male. Then you have a healthy foundation that you can mate and bond, and then you have this baby, and that's the first unselfish, altruistic level. Then there's a whole bunch of other levels you build on as you care for your children in the school they go to, and their playground, and this village, and the state, and eternity.
Observations are reality, not opinion. I'm going to present 2 early films that show observations. Please pay attention, enjoy, and gain some footing. See more about the Ontological Encyclopedia at the end.
Distributed by New York University Film Library. Psychogenic Diseases in Infancy, an attempt at their classification, 1952. A film produced by the Psychoanalytic Research Project on Problems of Infancy, Renee Spitzer, M.D. Disturbances of the emotional relations within the dyad, the mother-child unit, are among the factors operative in the etiology of psychogenic diseases of infancy, which we classified from this viewpoint. These diseases fall into 2 groups. 1. Psychotoxic diseases. The wrong kind of relation acts as a toxin. 2. Emotional deficiency disease. Inadequate emotional supplies resulting from insufficient mother-child relations. Part 1. Psychotoxic diseases. 1. Overt primary rejection. We have observed 2 forms of this maternal attitude. 1. Overt active hostility. The child can feel the mother's discomfort here. The ability to provide a maternal bond comes from the development of the limbic brain during latter stages of pregnancy and the first 6 months. Ask anyone that is a professional at raising dogs, cats, sheep, goats, horses, cows, or any other mammal. If an infant female is separated from its mother and a healthy bond is not formed with another, it is unable to care for its own young. This mother probably lacks this limbic development, and all of the desire and books and nice behavior doesn't give this animal level ability to bond. Even though fed and bathed, an infant needs more. It needs a loving bond, activity, and interaction, being talked to and moved around. Without these things, it will fail to thrive. In the worst case, it will have infant atrophy and waste away and die from vomiting and diarrhea or some illness due to its weakness. In a lesser case, it would just be called a colicky baby. A. The overt active hostility of this mother is extreme. We found it frequently in the mothers of infants suffering vomiting and respiratory disease during the first month. B. Passive withdrawal. When I was 17, my parents lived in Clarence, and there was a lady across the street with a newborn that was failing to thrive. The mother wanted so much to be a good mother, but was under so much stress and unable to give the child what it needed. The doctor recommended that she try finding someone that could care for the child. My mother was home during the summer. She was a school teacher, so she would take the baby during the day. And under her care and activity and love, the child began to thrive. B. The mother withdraws passively, does not accept the infant. Unable to nurse or handle her child, after repeated sucking frustration, in a few days of life, the newborn frequently goes into a coma, ribble. 2. 3 months colic. Infant, transitory colicky symptoms without diarrhea in the first 3 months of life. Mother, anxious over permissive solicitude. We have no motion picture material on such a case. The photographic record of maternal behavior with children older than 1 or 2 months presents serious difficulties. For the remaining part of this film, we will therefore show only the picture of the disease in the child. 3. Atopic dermatitis. In the case of infants developing atopic dermatitis, eczema, after the first 6 months, a significant majority of the mothers shows hostility, disguised as over-solicitousness, a form of anxiety. Four, hypermotility in the form of rocking. In the case of infants whose principal activity in the second half of the first year consisted in rocking, a significant majority of the mothers behaved in a psychopathic manner towards their children. They shifted rapidly from extreme pampering to active hostility. Five, fecal play. In the case of children developing fecal play in the last quarter of the first year, 87% of the mothers suffered from psychosis and manifested cyclical mood swings. Six, Aggressive hyperthymic. Children unable to relate themselves to persons after the first year, but showing great manipulative ability. A clinical picture called aggressive hyperthymic by Bowlby frequently had parents who were indiscriminately hostile to everybody. With their children, however, they tried to compensate their hostility consciously. Part 2. Emotional deficiency diseases. 7. Partial emotional deprivation. Anarchists depression. If between the 6th and 18th month of life the infant is deprived of its mother without adequate substitute, its development becomes retarded in the course of that first 2 months of separation. It becomes increasingly unapproachable, weeping and screaming. In the 3rd month of separation, the withdrawal of the child becomes complete. The infant assumes the pathogenic position. Its expression becomes increasingly rigid. The development of mental level regresses. (8) Complete emotional deprivation, marasmus. Infants deprived of their mothers during the first year of life for more than 5 months deteriorated progressively. They become lethargic, their motility retarded, their weight and growth arrested, their face becomes vacuous, their activity is restricted to atypical bizarre finger movements. They are unable to sit, stand, walk, or talk. Case LAM 69, age 9 months, 8 days, deprived of mother for 6 months. In 37.3% of the cases observed, the progressive deterioration of the total personality led eventually to marasmus and death by the end of the second year of life. Case LM91, age 1 year, 1 month, 23 days, deprived of mother for 11 months. Conclusion. A grouping of psychogenic diseases of infancy into psychotoxic diseases and into emotional deficiency diseases is suggested. The etiological factor underlying this grouping is the quality of the mother-child relation in the psychotoxic diseases, its quantity in the emotional deficiency diseases. This classification offers viewpoints that were found useful both in therapy and preventative psychiatry.
Scientists have long told us that by the time children reach this age, 7, 5, even younger, they are largely formed. Abilities and temperament that will serve a lifetime are almost set. But what happens in the early years that has so irreversible an effect? What are the ingredients of the mysterious mix, powerful enough to shape a person while it is still an infant? There is something universal in this intimate, sensuous, sometimes fiery first relationship that we recognize as mothering. From its mother, a child gets its first experiences of the world, the first stimulation of its senses: touch, smell, sight, taste, and hearing. With its mother, a child experiences its first social interchange and its first emotions. Investigators of human behavior are examining all these experiences and their interrelationships to determine what part each plays in a child's development. Can we discover the crucial factors in the rich and various stimulation a mother gives her young? Or is mothering so complex that it will resist analysis? Investigations of the relationship between mother and child proceed at all levels among humans and other mammals. In recent years, these studies of the behavior of lower animals have provided a new angle from which to observe the nature of humans. Most animals die if they are abandoned by their mothers. Motherless human infants usually receive some care. But the powerful effect of mothering upon the young can be appreciated more clearly when it is absent. Some of these children at Löhaus Institution in Munich have suffered brain damage. Some are mentally retarded. All have suffered the effects of disrupted maternal-infant relationship. The effects of early separation from their mothers upon children were noted in scientific publications some 25 years ago, when psychiatrist René Spitz observed a high frequency of retarded development among institutionalized children. The English psychiatrist John Bowlby created controversy in 1944 with his conclusion that early separation leads to a character disorder marked by a lack of affection or feelings for anyone. These depressed children might be found in institutions around the world. They are withdrawn. Their pace of development has slowed. They are listless. vacant, unnaturally passive. They have few emotional contacts or relations with others, little spontaneity, no laughter, no tears. To go back to the beginning of the relationship between a mother and child, an infant's first human contact is likely to be at the breast of its mother. Here, it is closely held and probably rocked as it receives its first food, and a rich mixture of sensory stimulation, body warmth, touch, taste, smell, the sight of the mother's breast, and the calming of its urgent pangs of hunger. Our animal nature is an endowment we share with other creatures of the earth. If it is valid to compare human and lower animal behavior, the common experience of mammals, breastfeeding, may yield insights into the development of both. Psychologist Harry Harlow at the University of Wisconsin has long studied the importance of early experience to infant monkeys. Some time ago, he initiated groundbreaking experiments dealing with the relative importance of hunger and the sense of touch to young monkeys. In this film record of a Harlow experiment in 1958, a helpless infant monkey shows a simple reflex behavior, moving its head when it is touched. This reflex enables the infant to find the nipple of its mother's breast, but the experimental monkeys never saw their mothers. From birth, the monkeys were fed from bottles. Dr. Harlow then gave several infant monkeys these substitute mothers, a substitute of wire, another covered with cloth. Whether the cloth dummy or the wire dummy held bottles of milk, the monkeys preferred their cloth-covered mother substitutes at all times. In a large cage with many objects to choose from, the young monkeys chose to cling to the contact comfort of their cloth-covered mothers. The isolated monkeys would spend as much as 15 hours a day clinging to their cloth mothers. And this attachment persisted after a separation as long as 2 years. When the monkeys were frightened, they ran to their cloth mother. When the cloth mother was removed, the monkeys showed signs of extreme disturbance. But they were calmed and comforted when the mother was returned. The wire substitute, even when it held a bottle, excited no affection in the monkeys. The apparent apathy of this animal and its rocking behavior became an important focus of later studies. Today, Dr. Harlow is still investigating the depression that follows the separation of young monkeys from their mothers. Dr. Harlow says that his work began as a mishap. He was raising single monkeys in separate cages when John Bowlby suggested that he was really raising a laboratory of abnormal monkeys. At that point, Dr. Harlow began to study the abnormalities. At the Hazleton Laboratories in Falls Church, Virginia, these normal monkeys are being studied and filmed by Dr. James Prescott of the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. Active, curious, and alert, these healthy monkeys have been raised by their mothers. When they are put together in a cage, they react to each other with interest. They are at ease with each other. They play and touch each other freely. When Dr. Prescott separates the monkeys, they resist, holding each other tightly. They maintain body contact and cling to each other even through the wire mesh of their cages. Monkeys raised in isolation behave quite differently. These monkeys were removed from their mothers at birth. They were hand-fed in incubators. They were raised in cages through which they could see, hear, and smell other monkeys. but could not touch or be touched by them. When they are put together, there is no play between them. They seem indifferent to touch. Or they react as though touch is unpleasant and move away from each other. When they are held, the isolation-reared monkeys show signs of great stress, screeching and baring their teeth. The stereotype movements of rocking backwards and forwards over and over again are typical of animals deprived of normal mothering. It is as though the animals attempt to give themselves the touch and motion stimuli they were denied in infancy. Dr. Prescott has theorized that this abnormal behavior in isolation-reared monkeys is a sign of abnormal functioning of the cerebellum, a brain structure associated with body movement. Similar behaviors in maternally deprived children, rocking and other stereotype movements, are common symptoms observed in institutionalized children all over the world. Some children who engage in stereotype movement, endlessly repeated, show evidence of brain damage. Stereotypical movements are observed in retarded children as well. All these children have been deprived of normal mothering for one reason or another, and display the same emotional and social impairment and stereotype movements as animals raised in isolation. Some scientists believe that the cerebellum is involved not only with movement, but with social and emotional behavior as well. At the Tulane University Medical School in New Orleans, studies of brain impairment are conducted with monkeys raised in isolation. Dr. Robert Heath has implanted electrodes, which cause no pain, in the brains of these monkeys. The electrodes are connected by wires to electronic equipment which monitors the activity of the cerebellum and other implanted areas, such as the septum. The septum is a principal brain structure associated with emotional behavior and with the experience of both pain and pleasure. Normal brain waves show up on a graph as consistent patterns, while abnormalities produce wide fluctuations, high-voltage electrical discharges, called spiking by scientists. Dr. Heath found such abnormalities in brainwave graphs of human schizophrenics. When the brain waves of some of Dr. Harlow's old mother-deprived monkeys were measured, they also indicated visible spiking in both the cerebellum and the septum. The mother-deprived infant monkeys seem to have suffered brain impairment of some sort. At the Jewish Hospital and Medical Center of Brooklyn, other motherless monkeys from Dr. Harlow's original experiment are the subjects of brain impairment studies. Dr. A.J. Berman observes the extreme aggressiveness and hypersensitivity to touch of these Harlow monkeys raised in isolation. After the cage barrier is removed, the monkeys stalk each other. The moment they touch, they are driven to a violent attack. Isolation-reared monkeys are frequently observed biting and chewing away at their own limbs, a phenomenon frequently observed in mentally ill humans as well. In a very recent experiment, Dr. Berman operates on the cerebellum of an aggressive Harlow monkey. His question is whether removal of part of a particular area of the cerebellum will modify the aggressive behavior of the monkey without impairing its body control. If so, it may be possible to link some of the adverse effects of a mother-deprived infancy with impairment of a particular area of the brain. Although Dr. Berman's studies are still in progress, operations like these have successfully reduced aggression in some monkeys and made possible human petting and hand feeding, which were impossible before surgery. Brain surgery is an extreme solution to the problem of abnormal behavior. Much more practical is prevention, the positive effects of mothering that may provide insights into the most basic needs of the child. The early Harlow experiments demonstrated that feeding, while necessary to life, was not most important to infant isolated monkeys, who craved body contact more and preferred the close softness of their cloth mothers. In normal development, vision is one natural guarantee of closeness between mother and child. Its importance can be seen in everyday games. Looking, hiding the eyes, and looking again. Endless variations of peekaboo, forever thrilling to new generations of children. When an infant has been born blind, there is a great danger to it in the disruption of normal patterns of mothering. This child has been blind from birth. He is part of a study by Professor Selma Freiberg of the University of Michigan Medical Center. Professor Freiberg is investigating the effects of blindness from birth on early emotional and intellectual development. This child, raised at home, has a warm and active relationship with his parents. He moves confidently. He is eager to learn. His motor skills are good. He is a happy and lively child and shows no blindisms, such as self-absorbed rocking, that are common among institution-raised blind children. In infancy, he was held close and carried about. Extra attention has been paid to this child, but the lack of sight has not permanently impeded his growth. When a baby cannot see, his mother must find special ways to offer affection and stimulation through other senses: sound, touch, and movement. This swinging substitute mother, a bleach bottle covered with furry cloth, was invented for an experiment by Doctors William Mason and Gershon Berkson at the Delta Primate Center in Louisiana. The isolated monkey has known no other mother than this moving surrogate, which rises, falls, and sways in a random way. This isolated monkey has an identical substitute mother, but the mother does not move. At 10 months of age, the monkey raised on a moving mother substitute is given a chance to make close physical contact with a human being. His behavior seems normal. He appears to be curious, bold, and friendly. The monkey raised with a stationary mother behaves in quite a different way. He seems timid, cringing, and apparently unhappy. He appears emotionally disturbed, unsociable, and unresponsive to changes in the environment. Rocking and other abnormal behavior were prevented in the monkey on the swinging surrogate, although some abnormalities did appear, such as thumb sucking and self-biting. The monkey on the stationary surrogate displays the familiar stereotyped rocking movements. Dr. Mason's studies raise questions about the importance of body movement in the mother-child relationship. Certainly among most mammals, body contact, movement, and handling are an important part of mothering. Moving a child is perhaps nowhere a conscious action for the purpose of stimulating an infant's sensory system. It is a byproduct of play, or of the necessity of getting the child from one place to another so a mother can do her daily work. But children everywhere are moved. Even when they are restrained by swaddling clothes or cradle boards, they are carried, bounced, jostled, moved. Movement is part of a child's experience long before birth. He rides comfortably in his mother's womb, gently rocked as she walks and works through her day. Do babies who are deprived of their full share of prenatal rocking develop normally? A significant percentage of prematurely born babies are known to have some brain abnormalities. In some societies, premature babies live in a world of expensive incubators, separated from living activity. At several New York hospitals, Dr. Mary Neal, a nurse, conducted experiments over a 20-month period to see if a specially designed rocking procedure would help prematurely born babies catch up to normal development more quickly. Would they exhibit fewer abnormalities than premature infants who are deprived of motion? Most premature infants spend their days sleeping, rarely waking, rarely crying. For several weeks, the babies were rocked for half-hour periods 3 times a day to make up the time they missed being carried in their mother's wombs. Then, the babies in the experiment were tested to gauge their rate of growth. Did the infant have crawling motions that show the beginning coordination of a left-right sequence, an expression of beginning mobility? Can he raise his head to prevent smothering when he is lying on his stomach? How long does it take him to clear his nose from the mattress? The full-term newborn baby has these abilities, and they are essential for the premature infant as well. How good is the infant's grasp? This indicates his muscle strength and coordination. It is easily measured by the weight he can pull. Premature infants who were not rocked in their incubators displayed less improvement than the rocked infants in such activities as raising their heads, beginning crawling, grasp, and response to visual and sound stimuli. Rocked infants also gained more weight. While this research is investigatory, it does reaffirm the importance of movement, even in the womb. The importance of rocking begins before birth. Children whose infancy is spent without mothering can become seriously retarded. This child is 6.5 months old. He has spent his life since birth in a typical institution. He has not been handled as a baby normally is by its mother. This child is already retarded by several months. He is unable to reach out and grasp a rattle, as a child of his age could normally do. He is unable to hold his head straight or to sit by himself. He has not yet learned to eat from a spoon. Professor Theodor Hellbrugge of the University of Munich has observed that retardation at this early an age can result in lifelong disability. To counter the effects of early deprivation, Professor Hellbrugge and his associates have created a special institution for young children who have been denied normal mothering. This boy spent 6 of his 12 months of life in an institution where he was considered seriously retarded. On Professor Hellbrugge's experimental floor at Lure House, he was given a permanent caretaker who was with him all day long. The caretaker is a loving mother substitute who understands the importance of maintaining intimate contact with the baby, touching, fondling, playing. Under the impact of special attention, this boy, once considered withdrawn and retarded, begins to perk up. The more he is handled, the happier he seems to be. The devastation of a motherless beginning seems to some degree correctable at an early age if special effort is made. This child is making rapid progress toward normal development. The phenomenon of substitute mothers is found among lower animals, too. At the Downstate Medical Center in New York, Dr. Leonard Rosenblum investigates different styles of mothering between two types of monkeys. One type, bonnet monkeys, are a relaxed breed, gregarious, even cuddly. They are not likely to waste even an inch of space between them. Close contact and body touch seem to provide security to the bonnet monkeys. Adult females are as interested and affectionate toward all young monkeys in the group as they are toward their own, and mothers readily allow others to fondle and interact with their infants. If the mother of a bonnet infant is lost or removed, the infant is usually immediately adopted by another female. When the mother returns, neither she nor her baby makes any particular fuss over the reunion. Dr. Rosenblum observes a strikingly different approach to mothering among another type, the pigtail monkeys. Pigtails are independent and rather aloof from each other. In the pens, they sit apart and avoid physical contact. Pigtail mothers are jealous and not likely to share their infants or allow another monkey to touch their young. In studies of the effects of mother and infant separation, pigtail mothers are taken from their babies for varying periods. This particular separation was quite brief. Had it lasted longer, the infant most probably would have lapsed into a deep depression. When Dr. Rosenblum allows the pigtail mother to return, the reunion of mother and child is frantic. This intense one-to-one relationship allows for no alternatives. If a bonnet monkey loses its mother, it is adopted. If a pigtail infant loses its mother, it also loses the experience of being mothered. Research into the complexity of the mother and child relationship proceeds around the world with animals and humans. Scientists may never be able to say, this factor is the crucial one. We may learn that different aspects of mothering are important at different stages of development. But some things are becoming clear. Infants require stimulation of all their senses. No sense can be considered of lesser importance. As critical as sight and hearing, as necessary as emotion and social interchange, as undeniable as hunger, is the need to be touched and moved. The baby craves and needs to be rocked.
Well, there's much more to the story, and putting the observations together to see the true cause-effect relationships of human development is a life's work that I'm doing in my website, The Way, the Truth, and the Life. It's an unfinished work with much to be done, but take a look at The Way, the Truth, and the Life.
This is the ending message. This is the website, The Way, the Truth, and the Life. These are the guest rooms in our 3 homes, New York, Florida, and Russia. They are prepared for those messengers that Jesus prayed for in Luke chapter 10. And he gave them the instructions. Reading from Luke chapter 10, verse 1. After these things the Lord appointed 70 other also, and sent them 2 by 2 before his face into every city and place whither he himself would come. As Jesus said in Matthew chapter 18, verse 20, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am with them. Verse 2, therefore he said unto them, the harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest that he would send forth laborers into the harvest. This is Jesus praying for more servants and asking us to do the same. Verse 3, go your ways. Behold, I send you forth as lambs among wolves. Verse 4, carry neither purse nor scrip, nor shoes, and salute no man on the way. Verse 5, and into whatsoever house ye enter, first say, peace be to this house. Verse 6, and if the Son of Peace be there, your peace shall rest upon it. If not, it shall return unto you again. Verse 7, and in the same house remain, eating and drinking such things as they give, for the laborer is worthy of his hire. Go not from house to house. Verse 8, and into whatsoever city ye enter, and they receive you, eat such things as they set before you. Verse 9, and heal the sick that are therein, and say to them, the kingdom of God has come nigh unto you. Verse 10, but into whatsoever city ye enter, and they receive you not, go your way out into the streets of the same, and say, verse 11, even the very dust of your city, which cleaves on us, we wipe off against you. Notwithstanding, be ye sure of this, that the kingdom of God has come nigh unto you. Verse 12, but I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable in that day for Sodom than for that city. In closing, remember Matthew 18, verse 20, where Jesus said, for where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them.